What is your favorite movie? Think about it for a second. Pause the video if you need to. Now take a moment to examine your choice. Try to identify what it is that makes you love it so much. What parts of you are pulled into that story, and what parts are held under scrutiny? If you looked at the movie's reflection, what would you see? In a world of scrolling and fast-paced content, I encourage you to stop and dwell. Even if for just a moment, and hopefully, I would be able to make a return on your investment. It is no small secret that Hollywood is falling apart, and has been for quite some time. From the dismal box office returns of the last 5 years, to the backlash surrounding political messaging, as well as the decline of movie theaters and the rise of streaming. Hollywood has been taking blow after blow, but has yet to find a way out of its own problems. Before getting down to strategy, however, I think it is supremely important that we answer one question before any meaningful progress can be made. Namely, what are movies for? Or in a more direct fashion, what is the purpose of entertainment? On the one hand, a case could be made that it depends on who you ask. From the perspective of the studio executive, movies are often just another way to make some money and a name for themselves. For the directors and actors of Hollywood, the desire to make art and to do some venue of self-expression may be more common. Although fame and money could just as easily be taken into account as well. From the perspective of the largest demographic in the film industry, that of the audience, movies are often seen as a form of entertainment that allows everyday people to unwind, enjoy a story, and to spend time with friends and family. Now, while I do find some legitimacy in these explanations, they are ultimately short-sighted, and I would like to offer a different explanation in their place. Fame, money, and entertainment aside, movies are ultimately meant to reflect a singular story, one that is so integral to us in our actions. We often call it reality, and unless we begin to take this notion seriously, Hollywood and whatever follows will wither into oblivion. Although it is by no means perfect, there was a time when cinema didn't just function as entertainment or a mere money mill. Instead, these stories helped us make sense of where we stood in the world. The greatest films of all time were trying to impress us. They were trying to form us. Regardless if that was or wasn't what the director, cast, studio executives, or anyone else intended. Such formative power on audiences is possible, not because of talented directors or a phenomenal cast, although those certainly help, but because of the shape of a story itself. It reveals something about the shape of reality. Stories then aren't reducible to personal taste or aesthetic alone. Whether or not a film is good or bad depends not on a personal opinion or a vantage point, but on how well they line up with reality. Are they aligned with truth or in a rebellion against it? Do they show forth justice, sacrifice, mercy, and glory as moral realities, or are mired in relativism? If it is the former, movies have the power to nudge audiences to believe that the world itself might be charged with meaning. If it is the latter, movies lose their power entirely. This older kind of storytelling has nearly disappeared in the present moment, and because of it, Hollywood is not simply in decline, it is unraveling from the inside out. And just mind you, this channel is about anime, but we have to lay a foundation in storytelling first. Stories changed who we are, and we love them, not just as entertainment, but as something essential to becoming fully human. And anime, more than any other medium today, is where we are finding those stories again. So bear with us.
Ask anyone why Hollywood is collapsing, and you'll get some familiar answers. It's all sequels and reboots now. The political messaging is exhausting. Studios are greedy and risk-averse. Streaming is killing movie theaters, and audiences are just dumber now. These grievances are echoed in many videos, including this one, where Chris Gore critiques the formulaic and risk-averse nature of modern blockbusters. Patrick Willems, on the other hand, in Who is Killing Cinema, frames the problem not just as a business crisis, but as a deeper cultural and philosophical one, tied to the shift over the last 25 years and how audiences value the experience of a movie and what they expect today that was dramatically different at the turn of the century. Meanwhile, in another popular essay, Why Hollywood is Falling Apart, the argument turns to ideological overload and shallow messaging as symptoms of creative breakdown. Now, I don't believe these arguments are wrong. In fact, I think they're very helpful in pointing out different aspects of the mess that is Hollywood. Each of them certainly has merit on their own. However, in the big picture, they function more as symptoms rather than the root cause. Like a fever, cough, or runny nose, they alert that something is wrong, but treating the symptoms alone will do nothing to fix what is actually going on. Additionally, none of them explain why the collapse feels so different, so personal. After all, creative bankruptcy, corporate greed, and disconnected leadership are not problems unique to Hollywood. And yet, the consequences are seemingly magnified for people when beloved films, franchises, and characters are obliterated for the sake of profit and the never-ending production of content. Ultimately, the decay of Hollywood is not due to a lack of creativity, poor leadership, or shifts in technological paradigms. Looking past the usual suspects, the reason Hollywood is falling apart is rooted in a cultural shift that happened 80 years ago. In the mid-20th century, something subtle began to take shape. Amidst the aftermath of 2 world wars, the atrocities of the Holocaust, societal belief in a shared moral arc, what philosophers call a meta-narrative, began to dissolve. Meta-narratives, which include examples like Christianity, modernism, Marxism, manifest destiny, and so on and so forth, all fell to the wayside and were replaced by postmodernism. Jean-François Lyotard, writing in The Postmodern Condition, defined the postmodern era precisely by its suspicion toward meta-narratives, that is, a rejection of overarching, universal stories that give meaning to human experience. In Lyotard's view, these grand narratives once legitimized knowledge, culture, and progress, but are now viewed with a suspicion or outright hostility. The meta-narrative then is not just a story. It is the idea that all stories, in some sense, are accountable to reality, transcendent reality. It asserts that justice is not merely a human preference, that beauty is not just taste, that truth is not a style of argument. A meta-narrative insists that meaning isn't invented by the individual. Instead, it is transcendent and meant to be conformed to. That is what shaped the majority of Hollywood's history and colored every frame of cinema for decades. With time, however, and the subsequent rise of postmodernism in the 1960s to the 80s, the root to Hollywood's vitality was severed, and like a freshly cut flower, it would only be so long before the petals would begin to wither and fall. In place of the last traditional meta-narrative, modernism, postmodernism was embraced. In rejection of the old meta-narratives, an anti-meta-narrative arose, one which embraced irony and the deconstruction of all that came before. Such a position is where statements like, everyone has their own truth, every story is valid, and there is no grand meaning, only micro-perspectives, became commonplace. However, consider what happens when the vertical tether that anchors stories is removed, when any higher standard of coherence or moral gravity is denied. Truthfully, what can remain but cynicism and subversion, fragmentation and ironic criticism? Today, the vertical orientation of movies, once the realm of transcendence, truth, and moral weight, has been flattened into the horizontal. And since stories no longer ascend towards something greater, they spread outward, become increasingly imminent, ephemeral, and sensual. More shows, more content, more stimuli. Quantity becomes a stand-in for quality. If audiences get bored, the answer has often been more sex, more explosions, and faster pacing. In the place of metaphysical depth, we're given emotional immediacy and aesthetic saturation. In short, though Hollywood still tells stories, it no longer knows why. This is what the audience can feel, even if they don't know how to explain it. Of course, once the meta-narrative was discarded, the industry didn't collapse overnight. Slowly but surely, it began to change. Without transcendence, storytelling has been reduced to consumption. The active narrative is replaced with content pipelines, algorithms, and quarterly projections. And so, in light of this shift, we begin to see the emergence of the symptoms mentioned earlier. Franchise fatigue. Not because people hate continuity, but because the continuity no longer goes anywhere. It has become aimless, and any teasers or references that may have once excited audiences have now gone flat. overt political messaging. Not because people despise politics per se, but because they can tell when it's preaching without presence, words without virtue or sincerity. Streaming bloat. Not because people stopped watching stories, but because stories stopped asking them to belong to something greater. Even nostalgia, the last currency of Hollywood, is bankrupting itself. We are on the 3rd reboot of Spider-Man, the 5th revision of Batman, never mind all the live-action Disney remakes. The postmodern age has no new myths and no new stories to tell. This is because when you do not believe in meaning beyond the moment, you cannot create nor care to create lasting myths for future generations. Corporate greed, content pipelines, political messaging, the death of the movie star, all these are real problems. But they are not the rot itself. They are the fruit. A culture, then, that no longer believes in any order above will eventually exploit its own myths until they become parodies. It is as YouTuber Solar Sand suggests, such a culture will eat itself to death and be forgotten. And as of now, such a culture is ours.
In summary, we wish to argue that we have not merely lost good stories or grown complacent to the surface problems of the film industry. It's worse. We have lost the very conditions that make good stories possible. Without a transcendent center, regardless if one believes in God or not, we can no longer speak with the authority about good and evil, sacrifice and glory, judgment and grace. We may be able to imitate the form of meaning, but not in its force. Even our best efforts will be doomed to become hollow echoes, or distorted shadows of older truths we no longer believe as a culture. This is why, increasingly, Hollywood relies on the inversion rather than fulfillment, or cynicism rather than conviction, or subversion rather than a submission to form. Because of this, modern audiences are not simply bored, they are starving. If you don't believe me, look at how well Top Gun Maverick did and the hype it managed to achieve. As Thomas Flight points out, there was nothing special about the movie other than the fact that it follows a framework that is straightforward, morally clear, and satisfying to follow. It has a hero, a problem, a struggle, and the eventual triumph. For people who have been fed endless IP junk for the last decade, Top Gun Maverick, which in all honesty is nothing that special, felt more like a cinematic masterpiece. So despite what executives may think, or anyone else who continues to promote the current framework, movies like Top Gun Maverick show that people still long for stories that move our souls, not just their senses or their wallets. They want to believe in something beautiful, even if they don't know what it is. This longing is part of who we are, and when it is taken away, we are left hoping for more. Fortunately, the battle is not lost, and there are still places where truly meaningful content can be found, even today. That's what this channel is for. Stories have shaped us in ways we're only beginning to understand. They gave us courage when we were young, direction when we felt lost, and meaning when life felt hollow. As the stories we once loved become rare in Western cinema, we found ourselves drawn to anime. Not for the spectacle alone, but because something deeper was happening. These stories reminded us of what it meant to hope, and to suffer, and to grow, and to overcome. They met us where we were, and called us to something higher. That's why we started this channel, not just to analyze anime, but to honor the power of storytelling and to help others discover that the stories worth watching are often the ones that shape who we become. Earlier I asked you to dwell on your favorite movie, not just to get your attention, but because I believe there's more than what meets the eye. Whatever movie or show came to you, I'm willing to bet it isn't your favorite because of the director or actors or clever dialogue. Deeper than that, I sincerely believe that you love your movie because it stirred something within you. Perhaps you see yourself in one of the characters, or you look to one you want to be more like. Maybe it helped you wrestle with love, or grief, or sacrifice. It may have even brought up the pain of your past, and yet it also gave you a safe place to tend to your wounds. That is what the greatest stories are for. They reflect our own and help us to see a way forward. They create a yearning to be something more, to do something more. Good stories remind us that there really is a destination, and as important as the journey may be, it's always in service to the end in sight. You, dear viewer, are a character in this story we call life. You also have a backstory, one that might not be all that pleasant, riddled with the pain and sorrow of times past. You have character flaws that make you both relatable and hard to be around. You have a purpose and a mission beyond mere existence, and a responsibility to those around you. Most importantly, you have an audience watching, and they want to know how your story ends. So what will you do? Will you do nothing and resign yourself to your own fate? Will you blame your backstory and fade into the background? Or will you choose to become more than you currently are? There might not be any monsters or dragons to fight in the modern world, but there still is a fight to be won, and we are on the edge of our seats to see what you will do next. Live a life worth telling, because I assure you, it is the only life worth living.